Earlier this year, Atlus announced Persona 5 Tactica, an all-new strategy RPG set in the Persona 5 universe. If you've only been a fan of the company since Persona 5 launched, you might believe strategy RPGs are new territory for Atlus. In a way, this is correct. Not including ports or remakes, this is Atlus's first original strategy RPG title in over 10 years. However, for those aware of Atlus's history, Persona 5 Tactica's release is exciting for a very different reason. You see, Atlus have a long history with strategy RPGs. This brings us to the subject of today's video. It's one of Atlus's longest running franchises, yet is largely forgotten about even within Japan. However, it has an equally important legacy. It's time to talk about Growlanser. Growlanser is a series of strategy RPGs spanning from the turn of the millennium right the way through to the early 2010s, developed by a subsidiary of Atlus named Careersoft. We did get the majority of the Growlanser games localised officially into English, so you may have already heard of the series at some point. This is especially true if you live in North America, the only English-speaking market Atlus reliably released their games in until a few years ago. This retrospective video will revisit the history of the series from beginning to end, and discuss what makes these games so special, as well as their impact on both Atlus and the Japanese RPG genre as a whole. Before we can fully dive into Growlanser, we need to briefly touch on the history of another gaming series, Langrisser. Langrisser is a series of strategy RPGs that stood alongside Fire Emblem, Ogre Battle and the Shining series as one of the earliest strategy RPG franchises to ever exist. The first Langrisser title was released on the 26th of April 1991 in Japan under the name Langrisser: The Descendants of Light. Believe it or not, the Sega Mega Drive version of this game did get a localization for North America under the name Warsong, so you might have actually played this already if you're an older gamer or a fan of retro RPGs. Over the years, 4 more mainline titles would get released alongside various ports. The final mainline release, developed by Careersoft, is 1998's Langrisser 5: The End of Legend for the Sega Saturn. Aside from Warsong, none of the Langrisser games received official translations during this time. That said, 2 versions of Langrisser 2 did receive fan translations, as well as Langrisser 4 many years later. So why am I talking about this seemingly unrelated series? Well, you see, the Langrisser series is where many of the key staff for the Growlanser series first met and worked together. For the first 3 Growlanser games, they would operate as a subsidiary of Messiah Games, under the name Team Korea. However, starting from Langrisser 4, they would develop the game under a separate company for Messiah Games. This company was called Careersoft. Side note, the newer Langrisser titles, namely the bad 3DS reboot and the Switch remakes of 1 and 2, were not developed by Careersoft. The rights to Langrisser were retained by Messiah Games until its IPs were transferred to a company called Extreme in 2014. These newer titles are those you've likely heard of, given that they were released in English. Now let's go over some of the key staff, starting with the series illustrator for Langrisser and later Growlanser, Satoshi Arushihara. In 1984, Satoshi began his career at Toei Animation, working on the likes of Jungle Boy Kenya. A year later, he became freelance and would later work on several projects, including the manga adaptation of the anime Legend of Lemire. This adaptation did get localized outside of Japan, not just in English, but surprisingly Polish and Russian too. Another aspect of Arushihara's career is his long-running work on Hentai Doujinshi, which earned him the nickname Master of Breasts. Seriously, these jokes write themselves. He's been active on Japan's comiket scene for a while. It's worth noting that even though Arushihara is closely affiliated with Careersoft, he was never a former employee. As said before, he was freelance by this point. Another key figure at Team Korea, who was also freelance, is the composer Noriyuki Iwadare. Nowadays, Iwadare is known for his later iconic soundtracks for the likes of Luna, Grandia and Ace Attorney. But back in the early 1990s, Iwadare was just starting out, having previously only worked on the likes of Toaplan's Sega Mega Drive ports and some Space Invaders titles. Langrisser 1 was his first ever RPG, and he'd go on to compose music for several Careersoft titles. In terms of core Careersoft staff, one of the most recognisable names is Yo Haduki, also known as Yo Suzuki, whom Atlus fans will know immediately for their works on titles like Reign Historia, Tokyo Mirage Sessions and most recently SMT5. Back then, Yo helped out on all Langrisser titles since Langrisser 2. Fume Yato is another veteran who started at Careersoft around the same time as Yo Haduki, and they collaborated on multiple titles together. Another noteworthy Careersoft veteran is Shinjiro Takada, who started work at Careersoft before the two veterans I previously mentioned. Their first title was a game called Sorcerer's Kingdom for the Mega Drive, a strategy RPG that features a battle system similar to the Growlanser series. More recently, they are known for working on the likes of Etrian Odyssey and Shin Megami Tensei. There are many more veterans. I could just make a video just on this, so I'll cap this off with Tomohiko Matsuda, who is one of the programmers at Careersoft running back as far back as Langrisser 1. Most recently though, their work relates to helping to manage remasters of old Atlus titles, including Persona 3 Portable. Following Langrisser 5, Careersoft would develop the spiritual successor to the Langrisser series. This title would be the first Growlanser game, aka Growlanser 1. Because there is no official subtitle for the first Growlanser, it's literally just called Growlanser, I will use Growlanser 1 to refer to this specific game, whereas I will use the term Growlanser to refer to the whole series collectively. So given Careersoft was a standalone developer, they likely did not have the resources to publish Growlanser themselves, so they did need a publisher. That publisher would of course be Atlus. So why would Atlus choose to team up with a third-party developer to publish a game in Japan? Well, much like Atlus USA, Atlus Japan used to publish third-party titles in Japan. So yeah, it wasn't just Vanillaware they had this kind of partnership with. These third-party titles include the likes of Gunbird from Psychio, early versions of Dodonpachi from Cave, some Kunio-kun titles, as well as the PlayStation 2 version of a title we later got remastered on modern platforms a few years ago, Kowloon High School Chronicle. On the 25th of November 1999, Atlus published Growlanser 1 in Japan for the original PlayStation. So what is Growlanser 1 about? Well, this game stars Carmine, an orphaned man raised in Rosaria, the capital city of the Kingdom of Rolandia, alongside his younger sister Louise, or Ruiz. Once Carmine reaches the age of majority, his adoptive mother Sandra allows him to leave Rosaria, so long as he's accompanied by her homunculus servant Tipi. Various events happen, leading him to become an officer for the King of Rolandia and become involved in the conflict between the nations of this in-game world. They are Bernstein, Ranzak, and of course Rolandia. Now onto the gameplay. Growlanser 1 was a hybrid between tactical RPG gameplay and RTS on an open map, which is similar to open traditional RPGs akin to Dragon Quest. The gameplay takes place from a top-down perspective where battles and exploration are on the same map. There is no transition to a specific battle arena like in many other RPGs, and it's quite unique in this regard. Players must give instructions directly to each character, like in tactical RPGs. This is the only time in the battle where the time temporarily stops. Outside of that, everything is in real time. Objectives are varied, so instead of simply routing the enemy, sometimes you must protect other NPCs, escape before time runs out, cause internal conflict, deal with unexpected reinforcements, as well as other objectives. This is where you can see the Langrisser influences, as Growlanser's battle system is, at its core, Langrisser, but more suited for turn-based traditional RPGs. This is even before touching on content found outside of battles. You can explore the various maps throughout the in-game world of Growlanser 1, like an RPG dungeon, and there are many sights to see. Carmine can also perform errands to raise his stats and change what he can equip. He can also romance women. Like many tactical RPG hybrids, the Growlanser series has dating sim mechanics. In Growlanser 1, this manifests via the vacation system, where you have free periods to take other characters on dates. Raising the affection of certain characters can increase the chances of you romancing them and unlocking their endings. Endings are also affected by the outcomes of battles within the story, so be careful. Growlanser 1 is said to be an RPG that can take up to 50 hours to complete all endings, so this game is pretty meaty. Plus also, you can date the guys, but the endings are bromances at best. There is no gay content in this, unfortunately, but that's not too surprising considering the era this was made. Although I've made describing Growlanser 1's gameplay sound easy, this was quite difficult for the developers at the time. This was because the team didn't really understand what kind of title Growlanser 1 was at first. And because of this, they found it hard to communicate this to others as well, including the PR department at Atlus Japan. Yo Hideki recalled this in a 2014 Dengewki PlayStation interview with himself, Takada, and Urushihara to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the Growlanser series. I will return to this interview throughout this video. It's widely known in the niche RPG community that Growlanser 1 was not localized outside of Japan. Although there is no publicly available explanation, it is possible to make an educated guess. Back in the 1990s, Sony of America really wanted to emphasize the 3D graphical power of the original PlayStation. Hence, they artificially limited the number of games with 2D that could be released on the original PlayStation, especially in the United States. Given these conditions, Atlus likely couldn't localize Growlanser 1 even if they attempted to. Many 2D titles were released exclusively in Japan but not in North America. However, some exceptions did make it across the pond to Europe. Growlanser 1 was not one of those lucky exceptions, but also, given Atlus's long history of neglecting the European region, this is unsurprising. As for its critical reception, there's not much online about the game's PS1 incarnation due to the lack of a worldwide release. However, RPG Fan did give the game 83%, for what it's worth. Regardless, it's safe to say Growlanser 1 left its mark in Japan and gave birth to an iconic franchise. Atlus and Careersoft were onto a winner. Naturally, this meant Growlanser had to become a franchise. So where would they go from here? With Sony's PlayStation 2 console on the horizon, many changes were afoot across the entire gaming industry. Atlus and Careersoft were not immune to this. Both companies moved over to the PS2 early in its life cycle, which was kind of rare for Japanese developers. 2001 was also a critical turning point in Careersoft's history because Atlus acquired Careersoft that year, turning the company into a wholly owned subsidiary of Atlus. Despite the focus on the PlayStation 2, Growlanser 1 did get an official PC port, which came out in Japan on the 25th of April 2001. Regarding the newest games, Growlanser 2 and 3 were developed in tandem and came out the same year in Japan. Growlanser 2, The Sense of Justice, was released on the 26th of July, whereas Growlanser 3, The Dual Darkness, followed on the 6th of December. Both titles are set in the same world as Growlanser 1, although in different periods chronologically. At this point, Noriyuki Iwadare would no longer act as a composer for the Growlanser series, forcing Atlus to look for another composer. But hey, he did do Grandia 2's music around this time, so that's a good compromise. He passed the baton to Hiroshi Fujioka, who composed the soundtrack for both Growlanser 2 and 3. Growlanser 2, The Sense of Justice, serves as a direct sequel to Growlanser 1, focusing on the same core conflict but this time from the kingdom of Bernstein. The protagonist, Wine Kruz, who along with his best friend Maximilian Schneider investigates vandalism by the border with Ransack Kingdom, allegedly by armed groups. In the process, various events unfold, changing their destinies forever. Even though it's a direct sequel, it has also been compared to Fandiscs like you find in visual novels. Gameplay wise, this title is a huge shake-up, as many of the defining Growlanser gameplay features known to English-speaking players were first introduced here. For example, it's now possible to add up to 3 movement points on the map to direct characters. It's also possible to select technical skills and how long to chant spells for. The longer a character chants, the more powerful the spell will be. The ring system was added, replacing equipable weapons and armour. Players add gems to the rings of each character to enhance their power. You can only get these rings from battles. Most interestingly, Growlanser 2 is where Careersoft introduced the defining mission system and scenario branch systems. Mission systems can be basically summed up as, the more conditions met, the more experience, awards and affinity with other party members the player receives, whereas a scenario branch system enables multiple endings. The ending depends on the decisions taken by the protagonist during the playthrough. In the case of Growlanser 2, there are 3 routes, one for Bernstein, one for the Mercenary Kingdom, and a third spoiler route I won't outline here. Also, due to its connections with Growlanser 1, almost all characters from the first game return in some form, including playable party members. That said, Growlanser 2 does scale back its open world exploration from Growlanser 1 significantly to become points based, where you instantly travel to a location on the world map. Despite this drawback, Famitsu gave the game a 30 out of 40 upon its Japanese release. Growlanser 3, The Dual Darkness, completes the Growlanser trilogy and serves as a prequel to both games. This title is set in a dying world where a lack of sunlight leads to a crop shortage and hence all-out war. The main character is Slain Wilder, a young man who lives in the Zeronia Federation, a nation fighting neighbouring Aggressivul. Other main characters include Annette Burns, the main heroine and daughter of the Zeronia Federation's president, as well as Raimi, a fairy similar to Teepee from Growlanser 1. Callbacks to Growlanser 1, alongside Slain being a silent protagonist, are a recurring theme within Growlanser 3. Most notably, Growlanser 3 is where the Growlanser series lore arguably gets interesting, as this title is set in a different world but still universe to Growlanser 1 and 2. The ancestors of the cast of those games escaped Growlanser 3's world due to the ongoing crises. In fact, in the opening hours of Growlanser 3, the main cast facilitates the escape of these various characters to the new world. So if you follow the story chronologically, the order would be 3, 1, and then 2. Gameplay wise, the systems are closer to Growlanser 2, especially in battles. There is now an open world map similar to traditional RPGs. The map is like Growlanser 1 in that you can explore the world outside of battles and fight random encounters. Dungeons are also more open in that you can explore them. They are also randomly generated like in roguelike RPGs. This overall blend is what makes Growlanser 3 one of the best in the series according to fans and critics. It innovates in so many ways and caps out the, at the time, trilogy that is the Growlanser series. However, what a lot of people don't know is that Growlanser 3 also innovated behind the scenes. This is because it was Satoshi Hiroshihara's first game where he drew all the illustrations digitally. This is why there was a change in Hiroshihara's art style following Growlanser 2, something that many fans noticed. Reflecting on this, Satoshi believes he put quote-unquote too much shadow on Growlanser 3's drawings, as mentioned in the 2014 Dengewki interview. So following on from Growlanser 3, where would the series go from here? Well, we need to slightly deviate a bit. There are a few more releases related to the first 3 Growlanser titles we need to go over first before moving on. With the first 3 Growlanser games now available, it does make sense to re-release them in some form. One of them you likely know about, the others you probably do not. So let's do them chronologically by release date. The first release isn't a game, but an adaptation on DVD, titled Growlanser Densetsu no Isan. This curious release came out on the 5th of June 2002 and serves to build on the world established in the first 3 titles. It contains various things, including an explanation video for the in-game world, hosted by the main heroines for all 3 games, slice-of-life side stories for the casts of Growlanser 1 and 2, high-quality opening movies for Growlanser 1, behind-the-scenes stories, Yayori's moon-reading fortune-telling videos, as well as a bunch of illustrations and interviews with voice actors and illustrator Satoshi Hiroshihara. It's a very fascinating bundle release. The second re-release is one you might have heard of. On the 18th of December 2003, Growlanser 1, 2 and 3 were all bundled together in the Growlanser Collection bundle, exclusively in Japan. It was a bundle pack of the PS1 version of Growlanser 1 with the PS2 releases of 2 and 3. There was no native port of Growlanser 1 for the PlayStation 2. Essentially, it's one of those rare cross-platform releases that seldom leave Japan, kind of like the Dragon Quest XI 3DS PS4 bundle pack that would come out many years later. The final re-release would be the very first Western release for the Growlanser series, Growlanser Generations. This was a bundle pack of Growlanser 2 and 3, and is also one of the rare cases where Atlus licensed their games to a third party for them to localise on their behalf, in this case Working Designs. Working Designs were an iconic publisher in the 1990s and early 2000s. You've likely already heard of them. Founded by Victor Ireland, they are responsible for bringing over many of the most niche and obscure Japanese games in the 1990s and early 2000s, including early versions of Luna 1 and 2, the Arc the Lad trilogy, Pop for Mail, and Magical Knight Reynarth. In fact, Growlanser Generations would be the company's last release before they closed in 2005. Like many Working Designs localizations, new features were added for the Western release. The most notable additions were auto battle, as well as enhanced voice acting. Additional bonus content like voice acting skits are also featured. That said, the Japanese audio was replaced by an English voice track. This voice track was a full dub, which was of surprisingly good quality. However, the actual translation itself was based on Working Design's localization philosophy, which was already beginning to age in the 2000s, but nowadays is definitely outdated and even offensive. For example, Hugh in Growlanser 3 uses the term spastic, which is an ableist slur, which subsequently undermines his whole character and would have to be removed in a re-release of the game. Another noteworthy aspect of this release was the significant delays Working Designs had in getting the duology approved for North America. I say duology because while Working Designs attempted to localise Growlanser 1 as well, Sony of America blocked that release altogether. Additionally, Sony forced Working Designs to bundle Growlanser 2 and 3 into a single release. While this release was great value to players who purchased the game, this halved Working Designs' profits. This is also partly why they released a standard edition alongside their usual extravagant limited edition. The Growlanser Generations limited edition contains an arranged soundtrack CD, a Power Ring replica, playing cards, and a collector's watch. I have the standard edition of Growlanser 3 in my personal collection, by the way. The cover is so nice and shiny, and I love it, and from what I've played, it's fantastic. In a 2005 interview, GameSpot asked Victor Ireland what led to the end of Working Designs, and Vic said, "Packing Growlanser 2 and 3 together, doubling our costs and localization time, and halving our profits in one fell swoop wounded us. Goemon not getting approved was the end. At that point, it was clear that the kind of games we do and the manner that we do them would no longer be a guarantee of approval. And if I can't use my 15 plus years of experience to pick games I know will sell and get them approved, what am I doing? What are we doing?" The majority shareholders in Working Designs voted to stop the nonsense there. I can't say I blame them. They'd lost enough money in the 3 years prior while we tried to iron it out. Because of the various delays and arbitrary restrictions put on them by Sony of America, many Working Designs fans also believe this killed the company. Perhaps if Growlanser 1 had a native PS2 port, we might have gotten that too, or even if Growlanser 2 and 3 were released separately and Goemon wasn't blocked, Working Designs might still be around today. Who knows, that's all speculation. Something else that we can only speculate on is why Growlanser Generations was not released in Europe. Victor Ireland also confirmed some publishers expressed interest in releasing Growlanser Generations in Europe during that 2005 interview. This interest never materialised into a publishing deal, and the reason for this is not publicly known, and given it happened 20 years ago, we'll likely never know at this point. Despite the turbulent history Growlanser Generations faced in the localization process, none of this takes away from its legacy. The overall reception to Growlanser Generations was critically positive. To this day, it holds an 81 on Metacritic, has an 8.8 in user reviews, and is nowadays considered a hidden gem on the PlayStation 2 among those who played it, myself included. Growlanser Generations was the first step Atlus and Careersoft took in releasing their flagship IP outside of Japan. Therefore, fans in the English-speaking world could enjoy it. From that angle, it was a resounding success. It was an important step to take, even if it would ultimately contribute to the end of one of the most respected localization companies in the process. That said, there's only so long you can keep milking and expanding the same titles. Hence, where would Growlanser go from here? Well, Careersoft would go on to develop one of their most beloved titles. Growlanser 4, Wayfarer of Time, known as Wayfarer of the Time in Japan, yeah that's an extra "the", was released on the 18th of December 2003 for the PlayStation 2 in Japan. Yep, it came out on the same day as the Growlanser collection that I mentioned earlier. Growlanser 4 is set in a different world from the previous 3 titles. In this world, humans developed a highly advanced civilization. However, this was lost to time thanks to the Angels, powerful beings who are the main antagonists of this game. 2,000 years later, in the present day, you play as Creveniel, a young man who is part of a mercenary corps led by Arten Schwart. After the mercenary corps encounters an angel during a mission, Arten tells Creveniel that he is the key to stopping the Angels. Following this, Creveniel must discover how to stop the Angels. Of course, it's not as simple as it sounds, especially given the entire world's kingdoms are at war with each other. Regarding Wayfarer of Time's gameplay, the best way to sum it up is it's a hybrid of all the previous main 9 titles, taking the best bits of each and leaving everything else behind. The world map and exploration are brought back from Growlanser 1, likewise the open exploration from 3. For battles, the evaluation model from Growlanser 2 and 3 return alongside the new addition of a timer. The quicker the players clear a stage, the more bonuses they get. Additionally, the story length is closer to Growlanser 1 rather than Growlanser 2 and 3, which are comparatively shorter. There were also some other major changes. One of these was the difficulty, with Wayfarer of Time being a much harder title in comparison to its predecessors. Additionally, the composer changed again. Yeah, Atlus had to hire another composer, this time Tomoyuki Hamada. In fact, Tomoyuki composed music for other Atlus titles released around this time, including Demi-Kids, after previously working on several other games like Super Bomberman for the Super Nintendo. He would later go on to compose the soundtrack for the obscure NES roguelike The Awakened Fate Ultimatum, and nowadays works at 5PB. So why wasn't Growlanser Wayfarer of Time localised on the PlayStation 2? The reason, while not publicly stated, is very likely down to the issues Working Designs faced, getting Growlanser Generations approved. Additionally, due to the relatively niche nature of strategy RPGs like Growlanser, Atlus may not have wanted to heavily commit resources to localizing the series outside of Japan before they had solid sales data from Growlanser Generations' Western release. The lack of a localization doesn't detract from the huge accomplishment Careersoft achieved with Wayfarer of Time. In Japan, Wayfarer of Time became the most well-known and beloved Growlanser title, and the reason why it turned out so well was partly because the development team were able to take their time developing the game as a result of Growlanser 2 and 3's success. This is understandable considering Careersoft would have found it difficult to develop Growlanser 2 and 3 simultaneously. Interestingly enough, Growlanser Wayfarer of Time did so well in Japan and became so acclaimed, it got a visual novel Fandisc. Yep, this is a visual novel set in the world of Growlanser. Titled Growlanser 4 Wayfarer of Time Return, this Fandisc contains 3 episodes: GLIV Return, Foreboding and Senshi. There are some interesting tidbits of info regarding these releases that might be considered spoilers, however I will detail them here because there's little info on this Fandisc in the West. Contrary to what many in the Western fanbase believe, Return confirms that Growlanser 4 is connected to the world of the first 3 Growlanser games and is not standalone. To further support this, characters from the first 3 Growlanser games feature in some of the side stories included in this game. The existence of this entire Fandisc is genuinely fascinating because it shows how Satoshi Arushiharu's gorgeous illustrations work really well in the visual novel format. I believe if he wanted to, he could have become an acclaimed visual novel illustrator. Some of the CGs featured in Return is among his best work, and I am not kidding. Back in 2005, visual novels were not viable to localize outside of Japan unless they had a lot of gameplay. So even if the PS2 original for Growlanser Wayfarer of Time did somehow get localized, this Fandisc definitely would not have got a localization. Something else that's not mentioned in English speaking circles much is that the Growlanser series actually has its own lineup of drama CDs. Drama CDs are most associated with visual novels outside of Japan, as only the biggest Japanophiles, weeaboos and Japanese language learners have any form of interest in them, but even more mainstream RPG series like Growlanser got them. Growlanser 1, 2, 3, 5 and 6 all got drama CDs based on their worlds in some form. Some are based on retelling events from the games themselves, while others are more laid back comedy skits. Either way, they're all unique. Some of them have their own opening and ending songs, which I am using as background music throughout this video. It's safe to assume that Growlanser Wayfarer of Time left an iconic legacy for the franchise. To this day, it is still considered the most popular title in the series on the PlayStation 2, and truly helped cement the franchise as a fan favourite. But what would Atlus do from here? As the PS2 entered the twilight years of its life, Atlus still had a lot of games lined up for the platform. This included the 5th title in the Growlanser series, Growlanser 5 Generations. Not to be confused with Growlanser Generations, Growlanser 5 is a fully standalone game that has nothing to do with the world or lore from previous games. For real this time. And yeah, the name is extremely confusing and I don't know why Careersoft thought it was a good idea. Atlus USA themselves realised this too, hence why they changed the name to Heritage of War in its official localization. So yeah, this was the first Growlanser game Atlus localized themselves, but we'll get to that. In the meantime, I will exclusively use the localized name, Heritage of War, to refer to Growlanser 5 going forward. Heritage of War is set on an isolated continent with a long history of, well, war. The Peace Maintenance Brigade, seeking to end the war, revived a powerful weapon, called the Admonisher, and threatened to use it if the war didn't stop. Therefore, the war stopped, and an uneasy peace began. 20 years later, a mysterious famine starts, leading war to start again over the remaining fertile land. Additionally, mysterious enemy Screepers appear, further making things dangerous. So instead of participating in war, Heritage of War's story is about preventing war, something often not seen in strategy RPGs. Another interesting perspective shift is that the story is told through 5 different characters. Players must play through each chapter in order to fully grasp the story of Growlanser 5. This storytelling device is quite rare in RPGs, and is unique to the Growlanser series in Heritage of War, which really helps it become a unique experience. Another huge shift for the franchise was with the gameplay. The gameplay adds more action elements, much like an action RPG with 3D models, ensuring the RTS gameplay from previous games remains in place to an extent. But players control the protagonist directly, using the O button to attack and the X to defend. Players can also give orders to their allies using menus like in previous titles, although allies do operate independently using AI. Additionally, Heritage of War has a unique skill acquisition system known as skill plates, allowing characters to obtain skills from the skill plates hidden within equipment. A third major shift you can probably predict is Atlus had to recruit new composers. This time around, Kenichi Tsuchiya and Aisuke Seke took the reins, bringing the world of Heritage of War to life. Kenichi Tsuchiya is a long-time composer at Atlus, having worked there since Revelation's Persona on the PlayStation 1. He composed many of their iconic soundtracks, including Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, Trauma Center, and every mainline Persona title. The other composer, Aisuke Seki, doesn't have much available about him online. Aside from the Growlanser series, he has one other credit on VGMDB. Arranger for the Milky Season Pair Collection Volume 5? Whatever this is. Anyway, there are several noteworthy aspects regarding Atlus's handling of the Western release of Growlanser Heritage of War. The first is this was the first Growlanser game to get an official release in Europe, under the publishing of Rising Star Games, one of many publishers Atlus went through over the years to release their games in Europe. The second reason relates to the North American release, which came out on the 1st of August 2006. You see, the North American release exclusively came in a limited edition, an ironic throwback to working designs. This limited edition contained an artbook, a media CD, a branded keychain, pin badges, and 2 lenticular cards. Interesting little side note, the back end of the artbook in the limited edition contains artwork from all the other Growlanser games at the time, even Growlanser 1 and 4, which were not localised at the time of this game's release. That's strange given this context, but it is also really cool to see Atlus USA acknowledge the existence of unlocalised games. The third noteworthy aspect is removing the original Japanese opening theme for Heritage of War, performed by Crunchy Brunch. Like other Growlanser games, the official Western release had to omit this song due to licensing issues, but the rest of the music remains intact. However, the cons of this are somewhat negated because the localised version of Heritage of War runs on an enhanced game engine compared to the original Japanese release, which makes it superior. The AI in this version is smarter, making the game more difficult. Unfortunately, Heritage of War did not perform the best with critics, given it ended up at around 60 on Metacritic, which makes it the least critically acclaimed Growlanser title to date. Many critics compared Growlanser Heritage of War's box set as actually being better than the game itself, which speaks for itself. Heritage of War's middling critical reception may also be a consequence of all the trial and error the game faced during development. Hazuki and Tactica reflect in a Dengewki 2014 interview that because 3D models became more mainstream in gaming at that point, they wanted to incorporate this into the Growlanser series. Hence, this desire to implement 3D led to the development issues. A silver lining of this turbulent period, however, is that it would make the development of the next Growlanser title easier. Heritage of War in many ways is a watershed moment for the franchise. It was a title that dared to try new things and experiment with major story and gameplay changes. Heritage of War is definitely forgotten about the most out of all of the localised Growlanser titles. While I haven't played Heritage of War yet, I would like to try it someday because of the things it does differently within the franchise. It's time to move on to the final mainline Growlanser title. Upon its release, this title completed the hexalogy of the series. Titled Growlanser 6 Precarious World, this title is a direct sequel to Heritage of War and features several returning characters from the former title. Set on a new continent of Esgrens, the kingdom of Hingistan is gripped in a civil war against anti-government rebellions. The neighbouring kingdoms of Phameros and Jiwal are dragged into the conflict. Phameros sent troops, while the Jiwal's most prominent private company, monopolists, sought to expand their private army's market. The world of Growlanser 6 is particularly noteworthy as it also features the world from Heritage of War, meaning players visit 2 continents. This time around, the composers from Heritage of War did return to reprise their roles, shockingly enough, although Atsushi Kitajo joined the team. In fact, Growlanser 6 was his first ever soundtrack at Atlus before later composing lots of iconic soundtracks, especially in the Persona franchise. Regarding gameplay, the core foundation is the same as the localised version of Heritage of War. Careersoft took advantage of the engine improvements to further improve Growlanser 6, even though we would not see an official overseas release of that title. There have been a few changes to the gameplay as well, namely that the gem system has been improved to allow players to upgrade their stats and gem levels. Players also get the choice of whether to customize these stats or not, and depending on what they choose dictates the various dialogue options that appear later on. So why did Atlus not localize Growlanser 6? Well, a reason was not publicly stated. The most likely reason was the increasingly small market for PlayStation 2 titles in English. A localization for Precarious World would have likely come out in 2008, almost 2 years after the PlayStation 3. Many Japanese developers had yet to meet the demand for RPGs on the PlayStation 3 at the time, and hence Atlus USA likely had to limit what remaining PS2 games they could localize from both first and third parties. Therefore, for first party games, they settled on Devil Summoner 2, aka the second Reido Kuzunoha title, as well as the original PlayStation 2 release of Persona 4. The Maniacs re-release of Shin Megami Tensei 3, where Reido Kuzunoha replaces Dante, likely also didn't leave Japan for similar reasons, although we did get this version as part of the HD remaster in 2021. Another possible reason why Atlus declined to localize Growlanser 6 can be implied from an unexpected source, a 2015 interview with former Atlus USA staff Nick Maragos and John Hardin. Both men worked for Atlus USA for years prior to the interview, with Maragos in particular having worked on countless Atlus titles as a localization editor. When asked about what his hardest localization project was to date, Maragos answered Growlanser Heritage of War. He said, "It was an old game and really hard for a lot of reasons. The files themselves were hard to work with and we weren't too familiar with the developer. Preparing files to start work took really long and it was just rough overall." Although no further details are known, it's quite possible these negative experiences localizing Heritage of War played a role into Atlus's decision to pass on the direct sequel. Ironically, this 2015 interview would be among the last public appearances on both men on behalf of Atlus USA. Nick Maragos left Atlus later that year in favour of Nintendo Treehouse, whereas John Hardin left a couple of years later to work at NC Soft. This is really unfortunate because the lack of localization not only hurt Growlanser 6, but also undermined Heritage of War. One of the criticisms fans and critics had with Heritage of War were the unresolved plot holes. An example of this is why the constant of Heritage of War had a magical barrier surrounding it to begin with. And this is the kind of plot point you expect an explanation for within a standalone title. And at the time, many people truly believed Heritage of War was a standalone title. Because Precarious World is a direct sequel, many of these various unresolved plot threads and mysteries are fully explained. This goes to show how making games for a console near the end of its life creates challenges, especially regarding localization. Nowadays, Japanese developers develop cross-gen titles regularly, but back in the late 2000s, their loyalty to a single platform sometimes hurt the games. Growlanser 5 and 6 are great examples of this. Hence, for a very long time, English speakers could only experience half the story Atlus and Careersoft told throughout these two games. Weirdly, history repeated itself considering Growlanser 1 wasn't localized, meaning Growlanser fans couldn't get the whole story for the first 3 games either. Despite this though, Growlanser 6 looks like a very interesting game and a fine way to cap off the franchise, as well as Careersoft's development history on the PlayStation 2. Following Growlanser 6, Careersoft began to move on from the Growlanser franchise. There isn't an exact reason that's public knowledge, but there are tidbits of information out there. One reason is that the bulk of Careersoft staff moved into Creative Department First Production, also known as Team Maniacs. This move happened following the release of Wayfarer of Time on the PlayStation 2. For those who don't know, Team Maniacs are the department of Atlus that work mainly on franchises like Shin Megami Tensei and Etrian Odyssey, and they are separate from P-Studio and Studio Zero. With this shift, there were fewer staff at Careersoft to work on the Growlanser series, indicating Atlus no longer see the series as a priority like it used to. Whether this is because of poor sales, an increasing desire to be homogenous around certain franchises, or a simple desire to work on something different is unclear. However, the Careersoft staff now at Atlus did indeed work on something different. If you're a fan of Atlus, you'll know exactly what this is, even if you haven't played it yet. Yep, I'm talking about Devil Survivor. Known as Megami Inbunroku Devil Survivor in Japan, Devil Survivor tells the story of a 17-year-old student who's known as Kazuya Minagishi in the manga, the player can pick the name in the game, who is trapped in central Tokyo, which is put on a lockdown and will be blown up in a week. Him and his friends Atsuro Kihara and Yuzu Tanikawa get given comps, which allow them to summon demons. Gameplay wise, these are turn-based strategy RPGs which gave Careersoft the perfect opportunity to take their skills and knowledge from both Langrisser and Growlanser alike to further enrich an established franchise. At the time, Shin Megami Tensei had no strategy RPG spin-offs, and Atlus themselves had limited experience with developing SRPGs in-house outside of Careersoft. They only had 2 relevant titles to their name, Stellar Do, another PS2 strategy RPG, as well as Thousand Arms, co-developed with Red Entertainment. As this video is about Growlanser, I don't want to go deep into Devil Survivor, plus there's also lots of information and retrospective videos out there from people who've played both games to completion. I haven't done so yet. That's how well known and acclaimed the Devil Survivor games are in comparison to Growlanser, which isn't really surprising given Devil Survivor did become a multimedia franchise, alongside a manga adaptation, as well as a remake for the Nintendo 3DS. The first Devil Survivor had a major issue with difficulty, which is another influence from Wayfarer of Time, which was something that was fixed in the 3DS remake. Devil Survivor also got a sequel, which got manga and anime adaptations. Anime in particular is quite rare for Atlus titles. Over time, Devil Survivor also became more popular as Atlus became a JRPG household name thanks to the success of the Persona titles in the late 2010s. Even though these games were made in-house at Team Maniacs, Careersoft were credited as the developers, which is unsurprising given former Careersoft staff worked on these titles. After almost 20 years, Careersoft finally had a name for themselves outside of Japan with these 2 iconic titles. It looked like the studio had a long-term trajectory away from the relatively obscure Growlanser franchise. But what would happen to Growlanser? When it comes to discussing Growlanser following the release of Growlanser 6, there are 2 hallmarks of the series that are relevant here. The first hallmark, which is usually associated with a declining franchise or platform, is that a lot of older games get remade or remastered. The second hallmark is related to Atlus themselves. They love remaking games. The Growlanser series was no different. The first remake was for Growlanser 1. Releasing in Japan on the 14th of May 2009, Careersoft made it to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Growlanser series. This remake became the definitive way to experience Growlanser 1 due to all the new features added. These features included new characters, new events, a new route. Players had the option to choose whether to play the original PS1 route or the new route for this remake. This new route also contained new endings to accommodate the new characters, as well as systems designed to make affection more understandable to players. Additionally, thanks to the PSP screen being a bit wider than the average TV back in 1999, the presentation is superior compared to the PS1 original. The text box is transparent, character portraits appear up to their thighs like in other games, and the text displays quickly. Given the increased prevalence of the internet, more people knew about this remake existing and anticipated Atlus USA to localise this classic game. However, this did not happen, and the reasons why are not publicly known. However, it is possible to take an educated guess. You see, Atlus USA published a lot of third-party games between 2009 and 2011, around the time of Growlanser 1's release and when localising it would have been viable. Some of these were Western-developed titles like Trackmania DS, however the majority were localisations of niche Japanese games like Hexy's Force, The Dark Spire and Sharon the Wanderer 3. Given this vast quantity of titles, Atlus may not have been able to allocate the time, money, or the resources required to localise Growlanser 1 for PSP as well. Some fans will also claim that Atlus's decision to briefly focus on publishing Western third-party games following the breakout success of Demon's Souls was also a factor. However, there is no evidence to support this, plus the only time they focused on publishing Western games was in the year 2011, which would have been after the decision as to whether localising Growlanser 1 was made. And also, this should go without saying, but Demon's Souls is not a Western developed game. Well, aside from the remake anyway. Regardless of the reason, the lack of a localisation for Growlanser 1 on the PSP was a huge missed opportunity to finally be able to play this classic Atlus title outside of Japan in English for the first time. It is one of a few well-known classic Atlus titles remade for PSP to not to get localised, alongside the likes of Princess Crown and Persona 2 Eternal Punishment. Atlus would somewhat make up for this by localising the second and last Growlanser game released for the PSP. You probably already know what it is, given that it's the most well-known Growlanser release outside of Japan. Growlanser 4 Overload, later changed to Growlanser 4 Over Reloaded, is a remake of Wayfarer of Time that added so much new content it became the definitive version of the game. Famitsu gave the game a 31 out of 40 upon its release in Japan on the 11th of August 2011. So why is Over Reloaded the definitive version? Well, it's a remake of Growlanser 4 that introduces many new characters, including 3 playable party members. There's also lots of new content outside of this. Some of this content was originally part of the Growlanser 4 Return Fandisc that I discussed earlier, which has since been incorporated into Over Reloaded, which partly retconned Growlanser 4 Return out of existence in terms of the series lore. Additionally, there are 2 new branching routes scattered throughout the scenario, leading to a total of 40 endings. This branching route system extends on what Atlus featured in the Growlanser 1 remake a couple of years prior. The choices the player make throughout the game dictate what ending the player gets. One is the original route from the PlayStation 2 original, a new extended route that incorporates the new characters and story, as well as the Dulkheim route. The Dulkheim route is particularly noteworthy because it requires Crevaniel to side with the Kingdom of Dulkheim. Some of the endings in this route require the player to kill all of their former allies, as well as possibly some of the villains. This route is also one reason Wayfarer of Time is considered to be among the darkest games in the entire series. Growlanser Wayfarer of Time's PSP remake, the last release in the series to date, ironically brought the most attention to the Growlanser series that it's ever had outside of Japan. There are multiple reasons for this. The most important reason is, well, Atlus USA actually localized the game, ending the 5-year localization drought that the Growlanser series faced outside of Japan. On the 31st July 2012, Growlanser Wayfarer of Time came out in North America, which marked Atlus's final PSP title in English as well. There are a few things to note regarding the localization. Atlus marketed Wayfarer of Time as the quote-unquote lost entry in the Growlanser series, which, given you've watched this video, you'll know there are at least 4 more Growlanser titles. The wonders of the internet making some marketing slogans completely unusable, although that didn't stop them trying again with Soul Hackers on the 3DS several months later. A couple of interesting tidbits about the localization came out in a Siliconera interview with Mason Hyodo, the localization project lead for Wayfarer of Time. He confirmed that work on localizing Growlanser 4 started in the summer of 2011, and that the quantity of text in the game is comparable to Persona 4 Golden. Now, I've talked about the challenges of localizing text-heavy video games before, and there is a learning curve for companies to manage the process. The implication that I see here is this was part of Atlus's learning process, because in later years Atlus would go on to localize more text-heavy titles with a faster turnaround, including the likes of Persona 5 Royal, 13 Sentinels, as well as the Uta Romanov Mask duology. Growlanser Wayfarer of Time's legacy is most impactful in the West for several reasons. The biggest reason is the overall increase in the market for niche Japanese games that came about since Heritage of War's localization, including from Atlus themselves, with other Atlus titles such as Persona 4 and the Department Heaven series leading to a much bigger potential audience for niche RPGs compared to 2007. More people were interested in checking out this classic title. The rise of the internet helped with this too. A quick search on YouTube brings up reviews from sites like GameSpot, something that would never happen during the PlayStation 2 era. Additionally, Metacritic shows a score of 67, which is overall fairly positive, especially compared to Heritage of War. Another reason is that Atlus published a digital version on the PlayStation Store. This not only allowed access to the PS Vita audience, known for a high software attach rate, but also encouraged Atlus to release Wayfarer of Time in Europe officially, becoming the second Growlanser title to do so. And you could even argue that Growlanser Wayfarer of Time was actually a success, especially for a PSP game localized in 2012, long after most other companies moved away from the platform for several reasons. Either way, Growlanser Wayfarer of Time on the PSP is a fantastic send-off to the PSP, and shows it's never too late to make a success out of a niche title, especially given how long it had been since the original Japanese release on the PlayStation 2. Even though it is largely forgotten, its impact on Atlus would last for many years to come. However, the small success that Wayfarer of Time had would not change the wider circumstances surrounding the Growlanser franchise, as well as Careersoft. If you follow gaming news, you will know Atlus was in trouble prior to its acquisition by Sega. Since Atlus acquired Careersoft, Atlus themselves were acquired, first by Tactica, aka the predecessor to Takara Tomy, in 2003, and later Index Holdings in 2006. On the 30th of August 2010, Index merged with Atlus to become Index Corporation, dissolving Atlus into little other than a brand name. Atlus USA also followed suit, becoming Index Digital Media. However, in June 2013, Index Corporation filed for civil rehabilitation proceedings as it risked bankruptcy. Later that year, on September 18th, Sega won the bid to acquire Index, and in the process include the Atlus brand and all their IPs, as well as Growlanser and Careersoft. These assets were transferred to Sega on the 1st of November 2013. As part of this restructuring, Atlus was revived as a company. However, in the process, Careersoft was dissolved permanently. The last title credited to the studio would be Devil Survivor Overclocked for the Nintendo 3DS in 2011. With Careersoft no longer operating and key staff all moved on to other projects, the Growlanser series became dormant, plunging into the depths of obscurity. Looking at the bigger picture, it's not surprising Growlanser and Careersoft went the way they did. Careersoft was deprioritised as a studio years ago when half its developers were largely moved over to first production. Because Atlus's priorities shifted away from Growlanser as a core pillar some time ago, there wasn't really a reason to keep Careersoft operating as an entity following Sega's acquisition. Atlus's attention in the late 2000s and early 2010s was aimed at more popular IPs such as Persona, Trauma Center, and Etrian Odyssey. Additionally, Atlus USA's strong presence localizing third-party games led to them getting a lot of goodwill elsewhere, especially in the case of Demon's Souls. Given what Index Digital Media said about acquisitions not panning out, very relevant in today's game industry by the way, it's unlikely Index would have considered trying to revive a niche franchise that even their own staff were not really interested in working on anymore. After all, you can't force game developers to make something that they don't want to make, as it will show in the end result. That brings us to today, where there is more hope for the series than many believe. Well, remember what I said about the internet helping to factor into the success of Wayfarer of Time's PSP release? Well, the same forces that helped that game keep the series alive today. Over the years, various YouTubers have covered the Growlanser series in some form, whether it be detailed game reviews on specific entries, including the titles in top 10 lists and similar things. Plus, given how Atlus titles tend to become very expensive over time, the Growlanser games are now highly sought after in collector circles. However, thanks to how far emulation has advanced, anyone can download these older games and play them on their computer. This makes the series way more accessible given none of the Growlanser games are currently available on modern hardware. Additionally, fan sites and wikis have popped up, such as the Growlanser wiki, the r/Growlanser subreddit, as well as the Growlanser.net fan site. The fan site in particular is still been updated at the time of this video's production, and it greatly helped me throughout my research, as well as providing a lot of the footage here, so shout out to the site as well as its admin Alvis Mave. Most notable, however, is the fan translation scene. When companies do not localize titles, even when the reasons are perfectly valid and understandable like they are for Growlanser 1 and 6, fans usually step in to take their place. The Growlanser series was no different. Fans have gone back to the older mainline Growlanser titles to translate them into English, and they've already delivered results. After years of work, a full English patch for Growlanser 6 Precarious World is now available, allowing English speakers to play the most recent Growlanser title to completion. This patch first came out in October 2021, but has received minor updates since to fix bugs. I have left a link to this patch in the video description. Meanwhile, a patch for the PlayStation 1 version of Growlanser 1 is currently in the works. There are also text translations available already to play alongside the game for both the PS1 and PSP versions, so if you don't want to wait, that's an option as well. That said, there's a huge bit of irony that the first Growlanser title will likely be the last title to get an English patch, considering the rest of the series has it, and hopefully this patch will come out in the next couple of years. At the time of this video's production it's not out yet, I hope it comes out soon. All of these things would not have been possible without the increasingly wide adoption of the internet and the huge advantages it brings to niche games and their fan bases in getting noticed. This is why gaming has grown as a medium. People with similar game tastes can meet and connect with each other, and people young and old can discover old and forgotten gems, both localized and unlocalized. It also brings modders and fan translators together to fill the gaps official publishers left behind, including with the Growlanser series. The Growlanser series is just one of many franchises to benefit from this. A lot of people will criticise Atlus for not localising Growlanser 1 and 6 at all, or even localising Growlanser 2 and 3 themselves. However, I would like to offer a counterpoint. Thanks to Atlus USA's long track record of localizing third-party IPs from other companies, many other strategy RPG franchises are now established in the Western communities. This ranges from obscure one-off titles like Thousand Arms and Eternal Poison, right the way through to longer-running franchises like Super Robot Wars, Uta Waramono, and Summon Night. The latter is particularly interesting because even though Atlus only localized a few spin-offs, this set the groundwork for Working Design's successor company Gaijinworks to localize the mainline entries Summon Night 5 and 6 in the mid-2010s. Speaking of Working Designs, even before Growlanser's internet presence really took off, Victor Ireland tried to get Growlanser Generations re-released on the PlayStation Store for PS3 under his new company Gaijinworks. However, he was unsuccessful as according to him, Atlus were not interested. So it shows at one time he was pushing hard internally to stop the Growlanser series from becoming trapped on legacy hardware. I say was because unfortunately Vic is no longer localizing video games. Following the English release of Summer Night 6 Lost Borders in 2017, Vic had to have surgery which concerned a lot of fans, especially given that both his personal social media and Gaijinworks company accounts became inactive ever since. But he is still around. He's occasionally engaged with other content creators concerning past titles he worked on, including the YouTuber GameSack, as a response to his video retrospective on Working Designs. It's clear Vic still looks back fondly on his time localizing these games after all these years, albeit much more privately now, which is totally fine, because after all he's now in his 50s and deserves a long retirement, and I truly hope he is doing well today. Other people that are still around include many of the key staff I mentioned throughout this video who still work at Atlus to this day, including Yo Suzuki, Shinjiro Takada and Atsushi Kidojo. Many of these former staff work on the Persona series, from Persona 4 right the way through to recent Tactica. Outside of Persona, many of Atlus's most beloved titles such as Radiant Historia and Shin Megami Tensei 5 were also developed by former Careersoft staff. As for the two most well-known freelancers, they're still active as well. Noriyuki Iwadare most recently worked on Lupe Summer of Gods from Marvelous, and is currently working on the upcoming Project MBR with Aichi Games. As for Satoshi Arushihara, while he did return to do some new art for the Langrisser 1 and 2 remakes, he's more active in the world of hentai doujinshi. He regularly goes to Comiket, Japan's largest convention for otaku media, and is currently vlogging his latest work, A Women's Daily Life, with very familiar character designs. Going back to the 2014 Dengewki PlayStation interview, the staff reveals some concrete information on how the Growlanser series impacts the development of future Atlus titles. Hazuki states that the idea of a time schedule is something he originally cultivated through Growlanser. Where time in the early Growlanser games depended on turns in battle, Devil Survivor's schedules are a key part of the story, where going to new locations directly trigger events. He also confirms that the Death Face video system in Devil Survivor was directly inspired by Wayfarer of Time's foresight mechanic. In Wayfarer of Time, Crevenil could see events in his dreams that would directly impact him in the future, and this was a great storytelling device. Whereas Takada believes Careersoft aimed to further emphasise the RPG elements in Devil Survivor in comparison to Langrisser and Growlanser, especially through using training and command battles, so he hopes more people see Devil Survivor as an RPG compared to a strategy game. Satoshi Arushihara, while not a games developer, also learnt a lot. He reflects that due to the way game development differs to manga development, he's now able to get ideas for characters that he couldn't before. The difference, he states, is that video game character designs are often based on an instruction from management, whereas manga designs are comparatively freer. Additionally, and this is purely speculation on my part, 2024 is the 25th anniversary of the Growlanser series. That would be the perfect opportunity to re-release some of the older games for a worldwide audience. A Growlanser Origins collection akin to the Exonocy Origins collection would be a good way to reintroduce the series outside of Japan. Personally, I intend to play through the rest of the mainline series and appreciate them regardless of whether the series ever comes back or not. 6 mainline games, a visual of Fandisc, and a bunch of multimedia merchandise and spin-off content is really impressive for a fairly obscure JRPG franchise from the turn of the century. To wrap up with some final thoughts, you cannot talk about Atlus without talking about Growlanser or its developer, Careersoft. Their legacy continues to live on throughout Atlus to this day, where it's the developers making their mark on the newest Atlus titles, the gamers who play and recommend the games, or even the community that continues to archive the series online, including translating the Japanese exclusive content. It's a legacy that's poorly understood yet deserves to be remembered, which finally brings us back to Persona 5 Tactica, the game I discussed at the beginning of the video. The fact this game even exists suggests someone, somewhere within Atlus, wants to work on strategy RPGs again. This interest makes sense because the strategy RPG genre has made a huge comeback recently, in part due to titles like Triangle Strategy, Mario + Rabbids, and ironically, the remakes of Langrisser 1 and 2. While most people see Persona 5 Tactica as little other than yet more Persona 5 milking, Persona 5 Tactica is a callback to Atlus's past, while also remaining firmly in the present and signifying multiple possible futures, including the revival of the Growlanser series. Regardless of whether the Growlanser series ever gets its own Saviour of Light, the answers the team gave to the last question in the Dengewki interview, whether they have any messages for Growlanser fans, are the best way to close this video off. Urushiharu's message is perhaps most relevant to the community's response over the years. He's glad more new people are still checking out the series and will keep checking the games out, which given this interview was originally done in 2014, has aged like fine wine. Takada's message is closest to the mindset of Careersoft staff nowadays, and why the series is dormant. As he learned so much throughout his time working on the Growlanser series, this is why he wants to create something new. Whereas Haduki's message is best sums up how integral Growlanser is to Atlus's past, present and future. As Growlanser is seen as the starting point of Urushiharu's, Haduki's and Takada's works, it will likely remain at the centre of their work in the future. He believes he's created a series that's still fun to play today, and looks forward to fans continuing to support his works. And given how much the gaming community have helped Atlus grow as a company, all while keeping the Growlanser series legacy alive since this interview, I hope he's happy with the result. And we come to the end of another hour-long marathon here on Milla's Game Room. Thank you so much to everyone who made it to this point. This video was a ton of fun to make. It was a lot of fun going over this often forgotten part of Atlus's history and how it impacts gaming today. I'd already gotten to the editing stages of this video when I found the Dengewki PlayStation article, and as soon as I found that, I knew there and then I had to rework this whole video to incorporate it in, and it's so much better for it. It also does mean there are a few inconsistencies I need to acknowledge, as I do not have the time to go over and correct everything, as this video is an hour long and I have other things I need to do. Namely, I used Yo Haduki and Yo Suzuki's aliases. They're the same person, but I didn't use them consistently, as well as pronouns alongside Takada. I didn't know their gender until I found that Dengewki PlayStation article, so I was using gender-neutral they pronouns in much of the video before I found that. So, there guys, P him, so apologies for that. Anyway, this is the only video going up on my channel this month, but it's probably also my best video, so if you're going to have only one video a month, make it be one of your best. Anyway, I can't wait to make more long-form content like this next year. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to show support, please like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please consider checking out my socials and donation links in the description below, as well as all my sources for this video too. Thank you so much for watching and have a lovely day. Bye bye.